Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Hello, whoever you are, new and old friends alike. Thanks for tuning in. Let me first express some gratitude to all of you who sent messages after last week's episode with my daughter Annabelle. Especially those of you who specifically sent Annabelle messages. I read her every single one that came in. And if you could have only seen the look on her face as I read them to her, your messages of encouragement and support and just feedback really made one little girl feel very special. And she said to me, "I'm glad we did this, Dad." It was really, truly a wonderful thing that happened, and your messages contributed to that. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And I have to say that the contrast between last week's episode with my daughter and today's episode with Sadia Bruce, it feels very indicative of how my life is going these days, because on the one hand, I'm just so incredibly blessed to have a wife and daughters and family around me, and these moments of joy and wonder that I am able to share in that. And last week's episode was a little example of that, maybe. And then, there are also encroaching other stresses on me, as I sometimes allude to on this show. And it's strange because on the one hand, I'm fine, I'm okay. I've got some people who've signed up for the teacher training program, and I've got people who are coming to my classes online, and I'm having what I feel is a nurturing yoga with people, but it's all online right now. And every once in a while, I step back and I see myself in a room with a computer and no one else around me. And I got to admit, it freaks me out some. And I think that is on top of, a whole reevaluation of what I was teaching before the pandemic and coming to understand where my practice is now and where my teaching is now. And I know I'm not alone in that. There's a reevaluation going on in so many ways right now. In any case, I've been really hungry to see if I can find people to touch base with who are also grappling with the same things that I'm grappling with, and finding ways to be who they are in the context of this totally broken system that we're trying to operate in. And Sadia couldn't have filled that bill better than anyone else. Sadia was on the show back in 2017. We talk about it, and it was just such a completely different moment in the yoga world when we last spoke, and connecting with her again after all of these years really illuminated what I was saying before, that there's all of these yoga teachers out there by themselves in a room with a computer or a device, doing their best to have meaningful sharing yoga practice. And I'm not saying we're not succeeding. I think we are in many regards. There's so much good yoga happening through Zoom right now, as we all know. But at the same time, it was like, oh my God, the vision of that. And I realized that there are in-person classes happening out there right now. I know. I also know that pretty much across the boards, as far as I can tell, the numbers are all certainly less than they were. And I just think, there's just still so much uncertainty about what to do going forward. Like if I think about a plan for in-person teaching for 2022, I feel completely at a loss. And I have every intention of making it happen. Like a return to in-person teaching, I'm determined to make that happen this coming year. I don't know how yet, though. It's just there's so much to try to navigate with it. In any case, Sadia is someone who I've met in my life who I find to have a very high degree of discernment. In fact, last time she was on the show, she was criticizing me, which is why I brought her on. But it really was helpful. It was helpful for me to touch base with her like this and hear her perspectives on what's going on and really come together around some important things. And it felt very supportive to talk with her again. So I'm grateful for it, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me drop my stuff. I mentioned that some folks have been signing up for the teacher training program. I'm excited about that. It is starting in January. There is limited space, but there is still some time left. If you want to find out more about this year-long program I'm doing and I've been rambling on about over the last few weeks, you can go to jbrownyoga.com/training. You can fill in the 3-question application, and we'll be happy to send you all the info, including the info sessions that we recorded. You can watch those if you want, or you can always just email me if you've got questions or whatever. In any case, if you want to find out about the training program, just go to jbrownyoga.com/training. Also, I want to express thanks to our podcast premium subscribers. Specifically today, I want to shout out Emma Slightholm and Jacqueline Steele. Oh, those are names I recognize. Shout out to you, Emma and Jacqueline. We appreciate you both. And all the rest of you out there who've become podcast premium subscribers. If you're newer to the show, the last 52 episodes are always free on the public feed. But then we do have a podcast premium subscription to access the full archives of the show. It's choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. And honestly, if you can't afford anything right now, then all you have to do is send us an email and we will give you a free account, no questions asked. But if you are in a position to give a little something, it makes a huge difference. Not only is it the archives, it's just a way to help support the show, which is entirely listener supported at this point. So thank you to everyone out there who's already become a podcast premium subscriber. And if you want to find out more about doing so, as well as all of my other stuff, everything I'm doing can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, I think that will be fine for now. As usual, I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's sit back and hear this very real and honest conversation that I had with Sadia Bruce. Hello?
The ominous recording in progress warning.
Yeah, it's funny because when I started doing this podcast years ago, it was on Skype, even before Zoom was a thing. And then even after I started using Zoom, they didn't have that.
Right. Yeah, this is a new feature. It's a new thing.
It is where they notify you if there's a recording happening, and you have to click a little button even to acknowledge it. And it's funny because for a long time in the podcast, one of my favorite things was I would just start talking to someone, and then at some point they would say, "Are we going to start the podcast?" And I would say, we already did, and I was recording, and it was kind of my favorite moment, but like a lot of people didn't like it. They're like, I didn't know we'd started. And I was like, I know, that's the whole point. But at the same time, it has also caused problems where
that's hilarious.
People will say stuff and then they won't want people to hear it. I'm like, no, that was the best stuff, you know? So in any case, now Zoom has that.
Yeah.
Well, Sadia, it is great to talk to you again. You know, the last time we spoke was in June 2017. It has been a while.
It's been a little while. And in fact, in preparation for talking to you again today, I went into my calendar and just went to 2017 and just traveled, did a little time travel. And what I saw was pretty wild.
Well, you know, what I remember about that conversation, because I haven't gone back and listened to it, honestly. I intended to, but it just didn't happen. Yeah. But what I remember about it is, it started with like, you made some comment on Facebook about an episode of the podcast, and I wanted to talk to you about that. But then when we got to talking, you were like some sort of, you were like thinking about not being a yoga teacher anymore. And I titled that episode Yoga Industrial Complex, because you were like really talking up, you know, some criticisms of the industry, which I was all on board with.
Totally. And here we are 4 years later, and I'm more deeply entrenched than I was then.
Well, I wasn't going to put it that way. You put it that way. All I was going to say is I noticed that you had gotten some gigs at some, you know, institutions like Kripalu and Esalen. And, you know, right. I think in some ways, again, I don't knock those institutions. I taught at Kripalu for years. But I think that it certainly seems like I would consider them part of the yoga industrial complex in some way. So as you say, you are a little bit more.
I am so entrenched now. And, you know, part of me is like, it's the whole Audre Lorde thing. Like, you can't dismantle the master's tools, the master's house using the master's tools. But then there's also how else are we supposed to participate in the charade without dropping out completely? So it's a dance that I've been in, and I'm actually enjoying being in it. There are aspects of it that are incredibly painful, but then, you know, when you're attached to something that's larger than yourself, you do get to do like true disruption within the container of, you know, the industrial complex, whatever we're calling it today.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could get more to that. What I would say is that it seems to me that on some level, especially over the last year and a half, 2 years, if you can get that gig, it's a good gig. And you can also always, and I believe this to be true, and know this to be true in my own experience, that you can always do your work often in those situations still. Like if what you need and want to do as a teacher can align with the context that institution is affording you, then you can do work on some other levels. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. You really can. It's really possible. It's possible.
Well, listen, let's get to that first, because I don't know, back when you were thinking about not becoming a yoga teacher, when did that change? I mean, or you were thinking about leaving being a yoga teacher because you were grinding it out in New York, right? You were in the city grinding it out.
Yeah, I was grinding it out, as so many people were. I don't know if folks are even doing that anymore, because that whole model has been, you know, has imploded, thankfully, for teachers.
And maybe we should just say what we mean by that when we say grinding it out, like hustling and teaching whatever 15 classes a week or whatever we were doing, and running all over the city and just trying to like do the yoga teacher hustle.
Yeah, doing the hustle. But I have to say, there was such a beauty in that hustle. And maybe it's easy for me to see this in retrospect, but I got to see for me, like, and it could be just like my social location or whatever, but when I was cobbling together my existence and like trying to gather different teaching opportunities and like figure out what context I wanted to teach in, I just ended up with like this cornucopia of like wild, kind of disparate opportunities. So for me, like the beauty in it was, you know, serving so many different populations at the same time and sort of really understanding the value of practice for everyone. So a lot of folks give lip service to that, you know, but they don't actually understand what that means or what that can look like or how it feels.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you say that you had these disparate things, I remember you doing like drumming and dancing and stuff. Is that what you mean? That you had your interest in your teachings in a lot of different places? Or what do you mean when you say that you had all these different...
Well, I say the drumming and the dancing is more to maintain my sanity. So that was kind of extracurricular. But yes. I think like those opportunities, like they sort of cracked me open in ways that allowed me to show up to my teaching in a more, you know, rich human way. But like when I say these disparate teaching experiences, there would be days where, you know, I'd have a private client sort of kind of stereotypically on the Upper East Side at their beautiful home. And then a couple of hours later, I would be in Harlem in low-income senior housing, also teaching. So it's like to have experiences like that juxtaposed just on a daily basis. It was, on the one hand, a little bit painful to see social inequity so close up like that. But then it was also like such a gift.
Wow, that's interesting to point that out, because I do remember having lots of private students at one point in New York City. It was like a thing. There was one year even where like Vogue magazine and like top 10 in things of the year was to have a private yoga instructor. And I was getting calls and it would get talked about even like in yoga teacher trainings. Like that was really how a lot of folks were able to pay their rent.
Making money.
Because you could charge more. But the reality is who could afford to pay $100 for an hour yoga class? I've never paid $100 for an hour yoga class in my life. I've never had that money to do that ever.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was especially interesting. And for all of us, really, we were at once the help and the authority. I think it's very interesting, this work that folks do when they're doing any sort of private training. You are the help, but you're also the authority at the same time. And it's a weird space to be in. It's really strange.
Yep. Anytime someone's paying you that much money for an hour or whatever, there's a power dynamic to that.
There's a power dynamic, but then there's also like, oh, like I can't sit up straight, or, oh, I can't breathe. Please help me. Aspect to it as well. So it's like this twin, you know, these like dueling power dynamics almost.
Yeah. And I also found that even when I did have very, I think, fruitful relationships in yoga with private students, and even some of those were students of mine for years, I saw them, you know, at some point it did feel like you were a luxury item. Right, and that never always felt fitting in terms of like what yoga inquiry asks of people. At least as I think of it, you know, like like you say, over time, even when it was a good situation, it didn't feel shitty. That dynamic that you're describing of like the help and the authority, like it was an issue. It kind of got in the way of what felt like the organic process of yoga or something.
Yeah, it really is super fascinating. And one sort of line of inquiry that I like, a road I traveled down on my own because I think I'm a weirdo and I think about things like this, is I did go back to school briefly. I went to Columbia. I took a class called Sociology of the Body. And it was with this professor, what's her name? Elizabeth Bernstein, I think. But she wrote this book called I forget the title, but it's basically about domestic workers and sex workers and how what they're really peddling is intimacy. And so for me, that lit up a section of my brain right away that was like, wow, actually yoga teachers, that's also what we're doing. So we're also kind of in this, oh yeah. And I've thought about this so much.
You use the word peddling.
Yeah,
So you got to unpack that. Peddling intimacy, but I get what you mean. And we maybe get to that too. But I think it's interesting. So you went back to school for a minute there after I spoke to you, and you were thinking about not being a yoga teacher. Were you thinking about finding another direction to go? What ended up happening?
I think I was. I think I mentioned in that interview that I was considering nursing school and this and that. And school, what ended up happening with school is very expensive. That's number one.
Yeah.
And but it was deeply enriching for me. I really like being a student, and I really like the opportunity just to learn from scholars who are doing it at the top of their fields, and just really digging into some stuff that I wouldn't have otherwise, had the chance to play with. But it was play, and it was really expensive play.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's so interesting too, because it's not like, it's different than the idea that you're going to go to college and that's going to give you a degree, that's going to give you this new credential, that's going to give you the money you need or whatever. It's just, I want to learn, right?
Right. And at that point, I was already even though I sort of had one foot out of my teaching, there was definitely a part of me that was and still is, very much in it. So it's like, do I want to pay all of this money to acquire an expensive degree that I necessarily need?
Yeah, I mean, talk about industrial complexes, the academic systems, whole other episode, maybe, So how long did you do more school before you, did you leave New York at that time?
Before I dropped out again.
I don't think that way. You said you're just learning, but did you leave New York?
No, I was still in New York for another year or so, I guess, before COVID hit.
Right. So you left before COVID, or you were there when COVID hit?
Yeah, I was still in New York, and the timeline there is a little wacky, because just prior to COVID hitting, I had applied. I was a visiting teacher at Kripalu. I had applied to become part of their core faculty. They were wanting to expand their team of in-house teachers who would work on curriculum and all this other stuff. So it's like, you know what? I'll apply for this job. I'm not going to tell anyone internally, even though, I could have, what is that called? Pulling strings or whatever it's called.
Did you know people or something at Kripalu?
I mean, I was a visiting teacher, so I knew the folks who were doing the hiring. I could have at least told them, listen, I'm actually going to put in for this job. I told no one. I literally applied through just the normal channels and said, okay, we'll see what happens.
Well, that probably served you well, because they knew who you were. You did work there. They had you on file.
Yeah. Yeah, they had me on file.
Oh, so that's how I was going to ask you how you landed the gig.
That's how I landed a gig that way. And so that core faculty thing, I was scheduled to leave New York and move to Massachusetts right as COVID hit. So we ended up, everything went online. They weren't sure if they were going to stay open. So everything, complete shitstorm. So I decided, okay, let me just stick around New York for a little while longer to see what happens. This'll blow over soon. Is what my
Wow, how many of us said that? Yeah, right.
Right.
Wow. Okay, well that makes sense. So how did you get the visiting teacher gig to begin with?
That, I think I landed that. I put my name in the hat somehow, because I'd gone there for the Black Yoga Teacher Alliance conference in 2016. Right. So all through 2017, at around the time I was talking to you, I was going up there once every couple of months or so.
Gotcha.
To teach on the weekends, yeah.
Got you. All right. So you didn't stop being a yoga teacher. You started being a yoga teacher again.
Yeah, I never stopped. I was all that talk, and I never stopped.
Yes, well, sometimes those seeds are planted deep, and especially when the tools continue to serve you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess, I really wasn't sure whether I was going to bring this up, but I feel like I got to. I feel like you're somebody who can have a straight conversation with me. And I don't know, we know each other because we both studied with Mark.
Mm.
And I saw you refer yourself as a Heart of Yoga teacher in a post not too long ago. And I don't know, I still have so much confusion around him. And so I just have to ask you, like, where do you stand with him? Can I ask it that way? I don't know how to ask the question even.
Yeah. Well, I sort of pulled out from that whole, shall we call it a community, ever since, shit sort of hit the fan there. And I feel like I have an interesting experience because I was never really fully inside of it, even though maybe it appeared so, or there were ways in which, one could say, oh, well, you really were in it. I hadn't been in it for very long. I didn't feel necessarily that I had been like kind of absorbed by the community or in the community. I felt very much kind of on the fringes, but that's not a function of my being in that particular community. That's how I am in any community for various reasons. So it's like when that stuff happened, first of all, I wasn't necessarily surprised. Yeah, maybe I'll sit with that for a moment. I wasn't
well,
necessarily surprised.
I hear you. Again, I think that certainly Mark had reputation in the past, and I do think that there was just an evolution within the yoga world and just our general societies, cultures around these dynamics between older men and younger women, or these power differentials within the yoga world. And there was back in 2017 was really when things were really starting to come out more and more, and then all the stuff with Patabi Joyce and all of them was coming out. There was the resurgence of a Me Too movement or whatever.
Oh, yeah. And I think, though, something I have been thinking about, I thought about it right before I got on this call with you. What's a way to put this? The language is not coming.
But I appreciate that you're not just going to say words if you're not sure about them. I understand that,
because in like the landscape that we're living in now, the dynamics that we're living in, like I'm actually having a visceral like challenge coming up with the words.
I underd because I totally get it. I guess. Body. I mean, for me,
and I'll say this. I'll say this. When I encountered Mark, and I still do refer to myself as a Heart of Yoga teacher. I feel like Mark was sort of my portal into the teachings of Desikachar, essentially.
That's right.
So that's why I sort of, I hold on to that label, I guess. And I also just like I like the kind of symbolism of it. But that aside, I feel like my encounter with Mark, if I had been, here we go, I'll put it like this. This is as plainly as I can put it. If I had been a white woman, I think my experience with Mark would have been completely different. And I would be far more kind of like swept up into the shitstorm than I am. But I think because I am a Black woman, I did not experience a lot of what other women experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess my question is, and again, I've had this conversation like almost too many times at this point, but I think the conversation that's been important for me is really like what you said, that, Mark was the person who exposed us to teachings of TKV Desikachar and UG Krishnamurti. And these are both people and things that they said and teachings that they gave that have been profoundly important and helped me in a very, very deep way. So I guess the question is how much of it, I never met Mr. Desikachar personally so much. I think I met him once, but not really. So, how much of it is like teachings that Desikachar taught that came through Mark to us and how much of it was Mark as a person and the way that he related to us. And
I think also, the missing element too, though, is how much of it was us just communing with our own bodies and breaths that led us to some realization of truth.
Oh, bingo. I like that. That's an important one to not exclude, because I think you're right about that. That's an important thing for me too, because I met Mark at a very earlier time than a lot of other folks. So my relationship to him was very different than I think a lot of people later on after he got on the like festival circuit and stuff. But I guess the other part of it for me is there does seem to be sometimes a hard thing to navigate as to how do we honor the things that we learned that we benefited from when the person who taught it to us is someone that we don't feel like we can totally support. And because sometimes within the movements for justice around these issues, there is the sentiment that you can't separate teacher from teachings, and to do so is actually just like kind of covering it up, or, you know, or not allowing for the necessary healing that would need to occur or something like that. I don't know. Do you have any feelings about how we should hold teachers accountable, or how we move forward in ways that are healthy and we're not just like whitewashing abuse histories or something?
Yeah. I have no answers where this is concerned. I have zero answers. But this idea of, separating the teacher from the teachings, it's like I'm increasingly coming to this embodied awareness that, and this will sound like bullshit if someone has never experienced it for themselves, but the truth is actually in you, and it's actually really very easy to access. Which sounds probably crazy, I'm sure. But truly, for me, being pointed in the direction of my own breath as it exists in my body, being receptive to this movement of breath in my body has literally changed my life. And I feel like that teaching belongs to no one. It belongs to no one and everyone, is maybe what I should say.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Do you think that source that you just described, or that teacher, or that knowledge or wisdom or embodied awareness, as you called it, is that coming from like an intuitive place from within you because you're spending this time inside yourself like that? Or where do you think that comes from?
It certainly feels so. It certainly feels so. And I feel like, where else could you go if you're spending so much time just like, and this language has been used by some of these teachers we've mentioned, but cultivating intimacy with your own felt reality and your breath and your body, like, what else will happen apart from touching reality? What else will happen? So it's like, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I couldn't agree more. I mean, lately I've been on this kind of kick about animism and new animism. I don't know if you know those terms at all.
Yeah. I actually
have.
I've also been in. Yeah.
I think that when I first got into yoga, and my early experiences are very much what you're describing. It was about this certain intimacy or felt experience that really did give me a glimpse, I think, into a worldview or a way of seeing myself in the world. And then yoga really became like the ground for me to stand on in that. But it morphed over the years. You see, when we talked in 2017, things had gotten industry-wise, or whatever, I don't know the right word is, such that I had been, all that was very much on the down low, much more. Like, we were all talking about functional movement and
That was so stupid.
And we were all like talking, doing less chanting and stuff because people didn't like it or whatever. And it got less mystical or something for me. And in the last 2 years, I've just been reclaiming that. I'm like, no, this is actually about rhythm and pulse. Ritual.
Rhythm and pulse. Yes, exactly.
And I think of you doing the drumming. I want my practice like that.
Yes, exactly. And it is like that if we're really practicing, because we are creatures of rhythm. We are rhythm. It's in the cadence of our speech, the way we talk, the way, certain folks' hips move when they're walking. Like, it's in everything. It's in the rhythm of our writing. It's in the heartbeat. It's in the breath. Like, it's on and on. We're so rhythmic. And for me, like, that's what practice has become, a celebration and a remembrance of this rhythmic quality and this connection to this earth that we live in that is rhythmic and that speaks in rhythm. I feel like rhythm is like, it's the mother tongue of the body of existence. And that's it. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
No, I love it. I was thinking of it as like singing together, like in movement or resonance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it is also, and that has been like my counterpose to what also feels like a lot of materialism, even within the yoga world.
Yes. And even the things that exist now, a lot of the dialogue that's happening now, it's only serving to re-inscribe nonsense.
Oh gosh. Well, all right. So here's the thing though. I guess I've been looking. Well, I've been looking for resources or ways to talk about this because frankly, when you talk about an animistic world, you're talking about the ability to talk to rocks and plants and your ancestors. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when I've attempted to broach that conversation with people, it very easily freaks them out or something. Because we're so entrenched, as you use the word at the beginning of this conversation, in, a materialist scientific worldview, reductionist scientific worldview, I should say, that the idea that that those forces even exist is sometimes scoffed at or scorned, right? And I guess I'm worried that I would come off as like flaky or full of shit.
Yeah, I'm with you. But at this point, Jay, I feel like I'm caring less and less because reality, it's so apparent to me. And I think, and maybe I spent time at Esalen recently, right? I was there for a month, and that land is so potent. And watching the sunset daily like that, hearing the sound of the ocean constantly, the sound of the creek constantly, like just feeling this vibration in the air gives me almost like the strength I need to just believe what I believe, to experience what I experience, to share it, and to not give a fuck about folks who aren't on board yet,
Amen, amen, amen. I couldn't agree more with that. And my heart just does a little backflip when I hear you say it, because I feel like that's something I've been coming to recently. It's been so helpful to like my own health, because when I'm in reaction to this materialistic worldview, and I'm like what I just articulated, like, oh no, people are going to think I'm full of shit or whatever it is, that is not a place of sthira in me. That's but what you said is, if I take my walks and I listen to the sounds of the forest regularly, and I really just embrace that this is the truth of my experience, regardless of how much my outer society doesn't seem to acknowledge it as real or something, and just stand in that and just say, fuck all of y'all who think I'm crazy or whatever, that feels much more empowering, and I feel better and healthier for that.
Yeah. And I'm sure, if the folks who wanted evidence, they could probably hook you up to something and they could find the evidence that they're looking for. Is it true that he's more healthy?
I actually think there are some very strong cases to be made.
Oh, yeah.
I recently had this guy, Joshua Schrei, on, and there's people out there who make, like, that's why I found my way to these animism writers, you know, and thinkers, because they are finding ways of articulating how, okay, science is a good thing, but there's certainly something that's been lost in terms of how we view the natural world. I heard someone say recently, you know, we're talking about academia. We've, you know, separated out the physical sciences from the social sciences. So we don't treat the planet and nature in the same way we would treat people.
Yeah, which is an absurdity, a complete absurdity to me.
I think so. And it also feels like somewhere along the way, you know, there's this idea that the medieval times or whatever were these superstitious times of ignorance or whatever. And then now we've come into some enlightenment where now we know the world better through science or whatever. I also feel that in that process, we like desanctified everything.
Where like completely.
We no longer see like water as holy, or, you know, or just like you said, when you watch the sunset, or when I see the moon now, it's like, that is phenomenal. Look at that.
It's truly phenomenal. It's truly phenomenal. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with kind of, and I talk about this a lot in asana practice. There's nothing wrong with linearity and delicacy and precision and all these things, but we have to remember that those things are just containers for the poetry and the mystery. And the poetry and the mystery is great, but it's also nice to deepen our understanding or our appreciation for the poetry and the mystery with precision and linearity. So I feel like there's some, like, this is binary thinking. I feel like that's an expression of binary thinking. And this idea that's been coming to me a lot lately is this phrase. Sometimes these phrases just get downloaded to me at random. And one of them is, the future is androgynous. So existence, like our heightened existence, the highest form of our existence will be when we're able to really like abide along the spectrum, anywhere that suits us along the spectrum, and just appreciate polarity for what it is, this organizing principle, but stop like blindly, like, I don't know, worshiping one end or the other when there's a whole field in the middle that we should be playing in and enjoying.
Wow, you're putting out a lot of important words. Just the other day, I had someone on and we were talking about non-linear poetry. And then I had someone on last week, we were talking about energy fields.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know, you're hitting all these words that other people, I've been reaching out to people.
Well, remember back in the day when we were hustling in the city and everyone be teaching the same category of poses without, you know, it's like it's the collective unconscious.
That's right. Well, that's what someone was saying the other week, which I really appreciated, this idea of fields and how even if no one sees what you're doing, you're still contributing. So important. But I guess my curiosity in what you just said is this use of, you called linearity or like, I guess I know what you mean. Like, I certainly have like set forms that I like to use, but I don't teach the particularities of those forms in the same way. Like, I don't care about alignment so much anymore, because certain linearities seem to really put people into places, or at least me at places in my brain that are not the direction of like a more rapturous or more embodiment kind of place or something.
Yeah, totally. But I had an interesting question from a guy I met at Esalen, and I could tell straight away because it was in the field between us, and I could relate. He's like a super cerebral guy.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.